It's fugitive Australian journalist Shane Dowling from the website kangaroocourtofaustralia.com. Now, I've just published an article on my website titled Scott Morrison and his office oversaw the conspiracy to protect Bruce Lehrmann, and then I make out the Prima Facie case for that allegation. And this video is meant to be watched in conjunction with reading that video, because reading that article, because it gives you the full picture that way. And in this video, I'm going to show you some snippets from various interviews and also from Parliament House, which helps support that allegation that Scott Morrison and his office did in fact conspire with others to protect Bruce Lehrmann, to make sure either one, he wasn't charged with alleged rape, which ultimately he was, but then to make sure he wasn't found guilty. The first video is about backgrounding journalists. Scott Morrison was alleged to have backgrounded journalists via his office. He claims he didn't. But watching this video, you're left in no doubt that he clearly did. He was ducking and weaving. He set up an investigation by his chief of staff to investigate whether it had been backgrounding. But all he had to do was send an email around to all his staff. He had about 100 staff in the Prime Minister's office. Hey, was anyone backgrounding journalists on this issue? And he refused to do that. So he set up an inquiry. He often set up inquiries to drag things out to make sure they're swept under the carpet. And that's very important, because if people in his staff were backgrounding, and backgrounding is where they're basically leaking to journalists and leaking lies quite often. When they background journalists, they background them and say, here, report these lies. And they were alleged to be backgrounding against Brittany Higgins and her partner. So watch the video.
I watched as the Prime Minister of Australia publicly apologised to me through the media, while privately his team actively discredited and undermined my loved ones.
Prime Minister, is this true?
I have no knowledge of that, and I would never instruct that, Mr. Speaker.
Members
I would
on my
never
left.
instruct such a thing, Mr. Speaker. I would never do that.
Has the Prime Minister asked his office if what Miss Brittany Higgins said is true? If not, why not? I ask for the fourth time. Prime Minister, is that true?
I have no knowledge of that being done, Mr. Speaker, and I refer the member to my previous answers on the same question.
I ask for the 12th time. Is it true the Prime Minister's staff sought to undermine Brittany Higgins' loved ones?
I have no information to suggest that, Mr. Speaker.
Can you categorically say that your office hasn't been backgrounding against one of her loved ones?
People make allegations all the time, second, third hand, but there's no one has raised that with my chief of staff out of the gallery, no.
Has the Prime Minister asked his staff if they undermined Brittany Higgins' loved ones? Does he deny his office undermined Brittany Higgins' loved ones?
Following my interview this morning on ABC AM this morning, my chief of staff received confidential information, not the matter the member is referring to, but confidential information from a primary and direct source regarding these matters. And in response, and based on that information, I have asked my Chief of Staff to commence a process in accordance with advice from the Department of Finance for dealing with complaints against staff members. We will now follow that process, Mr. Speaker, in dealing with that matter.
Laura Tingle, 730's chief political correspondent. Laura, what does that last answer mean?
No idea, Lee. Complete gibberish as far as I can tell. I mean, what the Prime Minister did this morning was, having sort of said, oh, I don't know about this, and for 2 weeks apparently didn't ask anybody in his office, oh, guys, anybody know anything about this? He then says, well, it couldn't have been true because nobody's rung the Chief of Staff about it. Well, who knew that was what you had to do? New process altogether. And then he gave that answer in the House, which really, when you actually dissect it, didn't mean anything at all, but seemed to imply that, in fact, maybe somebody did actually respond. And why wouldn't they? And, of course, Brittany Higgins responded.
At the time the leaking was going on, Brittany Higgins had already made a second complaint to the police. So the people backgrounding in Scott Morrison's office, and I have no doubt they were doing it on his direction, were in effect trying to undermine a police investigation, trying to make sure Bruce Lehrmann wasn't charged, and if he was, that it was undermined, because the key witness, Brittany Higgins, obviously would have been stressed out when Scott Morrison's staff were backgrounding a journalist with lies to report about her partner. Yeah, if the National Anti-Corruption Commission do investigate the alleged cover-up of Brittany Higgins' alleged rape, well, the first place they're going to need to start is Scott Morrison's office, his former staff members. Now, in the second video, we're going to see Gaetjens. They set up an inquiry Scott Morrison set up an inquiry to investigate who knew what and when about the alleged rape of Brittany Higgins. Scott Morrison said he didn't know until it hit the media in February 2021. But obviously, not obviously, but his staff members did know, and it has been reported that some of them did know as far back as only a couple of days after it happened, the alleged rape. And so Scott Morrison, instead of sending an email to staff saying, hey, what did you know and when, and he could have an answer back in half an hour, he set up an inquiry. So let's have a listen to Phil Gaetjens ducking and weaving and trying to blame the police for stopping that inquiry.
I will take that on notice.
This is not being dealt with openly.
We would not want to complicate any investigation.
Have you had discussions with the clerk?
In relation to the alleged sexual assault in the ministerial wing, as a criminal investigation is now in progress, it is inappropriate for me to add anything further in this forum.
You're not going to answer any question at all about anything?
I'm attempting to be as full and frank as I can in this forum.
In an era in which question time has become known for, well, a lack of answers, Senate Estimates Committee hearings have come to be seen as the last hope for getting any real answers out of government about what is going on, particularly when it comes to things the government would rather not tell us about.
The scope of what you have claimed is beyond precedent of the Senate.
But today was something else. Citing police investigations, the government repeatedly closed down all avenues of questions about the Brittany Higgins investigation in two separate committees, grilling officials from the Department of the Senate, the Australian Federal Police, the Department of Parliamentary Services and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. The most contentious exchange concerned what has become known as the Gaetjens inquiry. That is, the inquiry ordered by the Prime Minister, conducted by the Secretary of his department, to find out who in the Prime Minister's office knew what about the alleged rape on a ministerial couch of Brittany Higgins.
I want to know, and that's why I've asked the Secretary of my department to actually test that advice that I've received.
It is now a month since Phil Gaetjens began his inquiry, and last week the opposition was getting more and more restive about when we would get to see his findings.
This work is being done by the Secretary of my department. Now, he has not provided me with a further update about when I might expect that report, but I have no doubt the opposition will be able to ask questions of him in Senate estimates next week.
So it was a bit of a shock to senators today when Mr Gaetjens revealed his inquiry had been effectively parked for weeks.
On the 9th of March, the AFP Commissioner informed me it would be strongly advisable to hold off finalising the records of interviews with staff until the AFP could clarify whether the criminal investigation into Ms Higgins' sexual assault allegations may traverse any issues covered by the administrative process I was undertaking. As a result, I have put on hold the process of finalising documentation of my inquiries and the preparation of a report to the Prime Minister. I also told the Prime Minister of that.
So, the Prime Minister was told on March 9 that the inquiry was on ice, and then told Parliament just last week he'd had no update on timing. But that's not all. Just downstairs, the head of the Federal Police was giving evidence that didn't exactly gel with Mr Gaetjens' account.
Have you asked the Secretary to stall, pause or alter his investigation?
No.
You are making a decision here to cover up your inquiry, to pause your inquiry as a result of your own decision, not as a result of advice on the AFP.
I don't believe that's correct, Senator.
I think the evidence demonstrates that, Mr Gaetjens. We have the AFP Commissioner saying there's no reason why you would stop your inquiry. You are now telling us, I'm stopping the inquiry and I'm not answering any questions. That is entirely a political decision. It is not a legal or policing decision, and it is one you are making.
There were also questions in estimates hearings today about what the Prime Minister had been told about the allegations of an historical rape by the nation's first law officer, Attorney General Christian Porter, but with equally little information gained along the way.
Now in that video you just watched, you heard Phil Gaetjens, the head of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, claiming he stopped the inquiry because the AFP Commissioner told him to. But the AFP Commissioner told the Senate hearing that he didn't tell Phil Gaetjens to stop the inquiry. What you're seeing there, and there was two Senate hearings running simultaneously. One where Phil Gaetjens was giving evidence, another one where AFP Commissioner Reece Kershaw was given evidence. And I watched it that day, and Phil Gaetjens was actually getting transcript done up from Reece Kershaw's Senate inquiry, so he could read it while Phil Gaetjens is giving evidence at his Senate inquiry. So it was dodgy as. Anyhow, after that hearing that day, a couple of hours afterwards, Phil Gaetjens actually rang the AFP Commission and said, hey, can you change the evidence? So AFP Commissioner put out a statement later that day, and also approached the Senate, said, I want to change my evidence. Actually, I did tell Phil Gaetjens to stop his investigation, which is bullshit, total lie. And I read in the last couple of days that actually Phil Gaetjens, before he rang the AFP Commissioner, he was phoned by the Prime Minister's office. Someone in the Prime Minister's office actually rang Phil Gaetjens. And only after that phone call did Phil Gaetjens ring the AFP Commissioner. So that draws that line direct to the Prime Minister's office. Now, this next video is an absolute clanger. It's absolutely amazing. When Phil Gaetjens set up his inquiry, which is obviously a cover-up inquiry to cover up who knew what and when in the Prime Minister's office about alleged rape, the staff in Scott Morrison's office, about 100 of them, wanted to lawyer up. They all wanted legal representation before they'd answer questions, because they knew Scott Morrison, who was so shifty, so deceptive and so deceitful, he would potentially shaft them, try and throw them under a bus. And so they said, we're not answering questions unless we got lawyers. So watch this next video.
Are any of the Prime Minister's stars legally represented for the purpose of your inquiry?
Again, Senator, I'd like to take that on notice, but
Seriously?
So does that mean that...
Well, we know what the answer is.
So the answer is yes?
The answer is yes, because
Can
otherwise
I
you would say
ask,
no.
Just for complete clarification about that question, are you asking if I had, in some cases, to speak to legal representatives and not staff members, or that they just had legal representatives?
I didn't ask that. Please
with them?
don't construe the question in a way that suits you.
No, I just want to know what you're really asking.
I want to know if any of them have lawyered up. I want to know if any of the PMO have lawyered up in relation to your inquiry. And you know what? I reckon people want to know that.
I will take that on notice.
Are any staff legal costs being covered for the purposes of this investigation?
Senator, there are processes under the Legal Services Direction for MOPS Act staff to be eligible for certain legal costs to be covered. It is long-standing convention not to identify
I haven't asked
individual circumstances.
Hang on. I'm not asking who. I'm asking you, are any staff members' legal fees being covered by public funds? Don't you think people are entitled to know that?
So, Senator, I'm conscious of the fact that there's a long-standing set of practices that exist around the application of those rights for staff under the Members of Parliament Staff Act and the application of the Legal Services Direction and the conventions.
On what? But it's that.
But the
honestly,
conventions that have
seriously,
existed
the cover-up is unreal. You won't
well
even tell people
incidents,
if you're paying for their legal costs.
Well before
it's unbelievable.
These
I'm not even asking who. You won't even tell people if you're paying for the legal costs of staff to deal with Mr. Gaetjens' inquiry.
So the fact that staff in Scott Morrison's office refused to answer questions unless they had lawyers, and looks like the government ultimately paid for those lawyers because they were so distrusting of Scott Morrison. Really, it's a major insult on Scott Morrison. Us as the public, we could like him or dislike him or whatever, but his staff members who work with him on a day-to-day basis, they won't know what he's really like, and they're saying he's so dishonest, we can't trust him. We want lawyers there to represent us before we answer any questions, because he might try and throw us under a bus, say we conspired to hide the alleged rape. Now, the next video is just a short video. It's Scott Morrison admitting in Parliament that when federal MP Angus Taylor was being investigated for fabricating a document, or his office was, they fabricated a document to try and embarrass a Sydney Lord Mayor because apparently because Angus Taylor's wife was thinking about running for Lord Mayor, so they fabricated a document. The Sydney Council was spending $16 million on travel per year, when in fact they were spending something like $16,000. So someone doctored up the document, and then they used that to issue a press release and attack Sydney Mayor Clover Moore for being a hypocrite as far as the environment was concerned, because they were spending a big $16 million on travel when it was bullshit. They were only spending something like $6,000 a year. And when Scott Morrison found out the police were investigating for that fabrication of a government document, he rang the New South Wales Police Commissioner straight away. So it just shows that that Scott Morrison will ring anyone at the highest level to discuss criminal investigations if it suits his purpose. So let's watch the video.
As I told the House 4 times yesterday, I was going to talk to the New South Wales Police. I don't know who they thought I was going to call, Mr Speaker. Did they think I was going to call the parking infringements officer at the Sutherland Police Station? Maybe, Mr Speaker, I was going to call the Water Police or the Dog Squad, Mr Speaker, or perhaps the commander of the police band. But, Mr Speaker, I spoke to the Police Commissioner because I needed to know to exercise my responsibilities, both to this House and under the ministerial standards, to exercise the assessment that is required of me on those matters. That's what I said I would do. That's what I did. I have reported it back to this House, Mr Speaker, and I think that sets out the matter pretty clearly.
Now, the next video is about why Bruce Lehrmann was sacked, and you'll see the politicians ducking and weaving. And throughout this, one of the reasons there's a huge cover-up is because so many Liberal politicians and staffers are involved. Right throughout this video you're just watching, and you watch the rest of it, you'll see politicians and staffers ducking and weaving on the issue, and they're all ducking and weaving because they're all involved in the cover-up. And that's why it just snowballed. It snowballed from a situation where they wanted to cover up the alleged rape before the 2019 election. Then when it broke in 2021, they were trying to cover up as much as possible before the 2022 election. And it just snowballed. They're all involved. So let's watch this video on why Bruce Lehrmann was sacked.
Was it a security breach? The access to the office.
From the perspective of defence, no.
We know from Ms Jones, from defence's perspective, it was not a security breach because they have categories.
Understood, yes.
Yep. So I'm asking, on what basis was it a security breach?
Well, I will take that. I'll accept your invitation, Senator, to take that on notice.
What was the misconduct for which the individual was sacked?
Senator, I have sought advice on that as to what I'm able to put on the public record, because, Senator, there may be an association with the events which are the subject of a federal police investigation.
Yeah, the problem with that answer is the government asserts there is no connection. So the government's case, or the government's story, is we didn't know about this alleged sexual assault. We sacked him for another reason. So I don't know that you can then say to me, I can't answer why we sacked him because it might be connected to a police investigation into the sexual assault. I am probing your government's defence to the charge that you did not act on an alleged rape. And part of your defence to that is that we didn't know and he was sacked for another reason. And the Prime Minister himself has said that. So you can't now say to me, I'm not going to answer what he was sacked for because of a police investigation into the other matter. Well, Senator, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, if you want to know why the Liberal Party and News Corp dislike Brittany Higgins and Grace Tame so much, watch this from the February 2022 at the National Press Club where they unloaded on Scott Morrison, and rightly so.
I didn't want his sympathy as a father. I wanted him to use his power as Prime Minister. Some of his language last year was shocking and at times, admittedly, a bit offensive. But his words wouldn't matter if his actions had measured up, then or since. I wanted him to wield the weight of his office and drive change in the party and our parliament and out into the country. And 1 year later, I don't care if the government has improved the way that they talk about these issues. I'm not interested in words anymore. I want to see action.
On the 17th of August last year, not 5 months after being named Australian of the Year, I received a threatening phone call from a senior member of a government-funded organisation asking for my word that I wouldn't say anything damning about the Prime Minister on the evening of the next Australian of the Year Awards. You're an influential person. He'll have a fear, they said. A fear? What kind of fear? I asked myself. A fear for our nation's most vulnerable? A fear for the future of our planet? And then I heard the words, you know, with an election coming soon. And it crystallised. A fear. A fear for himself and no one else. A fear that he might lose his position, or more to the point, his power.
Now, Bruce Lehrmann has just sued the ABC in relation to that National Press Club speech, and he's given himself an uppercut, so as his lawyers. Looks like it'll be kicked out on legal grounds, if not legal grounds, on a legal technicality. Actually, the legal technicality will probably have it kicked out first, but then if that fails, it'll probably be kicked out on legal grounds because he'll unable to prove that serious harm was done, because that was long after it had been hit the media that he was being investigated and ultimately charged with rape. And I just did a YouTube video on that subject, so you can go to my YouTube channel and watch that video, and I'll explain it further there. And this last video is on the 60 Minutes story just before the 2022 election, where Scott Morrison and his wife attacked Grace Tame. And the reason I put that in here is because it just shows you how morally and ethically bankrupt Scott Morrison is. He's gone on national TV, attacked Grace Tame because she didn't smile when she met him in January 2022 for the Australian of the Year Awards. Because she didn't smile, Scott Morrison and his wife went on 60 Minutes and attacked her. Oh, she's no manners. Oh, what bullshit. Absolutely disgraceful of Scott Morrison and his wife. And then they had that half-wit Barnaby Joyce back him up. Barnaby Joyce flew his family down, his wife and 4 daughters down to Canberra, took happy snaps before an election, I think it was. He wanted the happy snaps for the election campaign while he was having an affair with his one of his staffers, who he ultimately got pregnant and ditched his wife for. And there he is dribbling on. You know, you got to have respect for the office. He has respect for no one. Clown.
A character reference offered by the woman who knows him best.
He's all about problem solving, so that can come across sometimes as serious, uncaring, or lacking empathy, but it isn't that at all.
Congratulations.
Jenny Morrison also offering her take on that icy photo opportunity.
I respect people that want to change things, but I still think there's manners and respect.
I'm on Jenny Morrison's side. I think that you don't have to respect the person, even if you don't, you have to respect the office.
And the reason I put that part in this video is because if Scott Morrison and his wife will go on national TV and be seen to be attacking Grace Tame, a survivor of child sexual abuse, they'll attack anyone behind the scenes. And clearly that was Scott Morrison was doing in relation to Brittany Higgins. He was undermining her, making sure backgrounding the media to attack her, which the News Corp media were doing and still doing. And by doing that, he was in effect defending Bruce Lehrmann. Now, make sure you visit my website, Kangaroo Court of Australia. You'll be able to read that article. It's got a lot of links in there. It's got a lot more information. And like I said at the beginning, you really need to read that article and watch this video in conjunction with the two because it gives you the broader story. Kangaroo Court of Australia is independent media. I publish a website, YouTube channel, Facebook page and Twitter account, and I'm reliant on donations to keep on publishing. So please support my Patreon account or PayPal account, and please share this video on Facebook or Twitter, etc. Thank you for your time and have a good day.